Let's watch those numbers get bigger. Oh, here we go. There they come. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, everyone.
We're just going to wait until we get up to a good number, and then Rob and Dom will kick off with their presentation. It is rather strange when you can't see anyone, isn't it? I'm glad I can see you too. I feel safe.
Yeah, I'm quite glad I can't see how many people are joining. There are hordes of people coming into the room.
So we're 24 at the moment, 26, 27.
They're coming in
keep
now.
Counting. I could keep counting until it goes up and up and up. So for those that are joining, if you guys throughout the presentation could use the Q&A section for any questions. We have left a bit of time at the end of the talk to answer questions live, but I am also going to answer some questions through typing throughout the presentation, but I'll be sure to save some for Rob and Dom to do as well. So yeah, put them in the Q&A rather than the chat section, please. Well, we seem to have... Oh, we've lost one. Oh no.
Back.
I reckon, what time is it? Give it a minute or so more.
Thank you.
It has slowed off now. Okay, it's going up again a little bit. Cool. So yeah, for those that are joining us, please can you use the Q&A section to ask any questions. We'll save some for Rob and Dom to answer live, but I'll also be typing throughout to answer any questions that do come in so we can get more answered.
I don't know how my multitasking is, so I'll definitely leave some space at the end for questions. We have got one about if the recordings are going to be sent out to everyone who booked the event.
Yeah, so we're going to be releasing all videos of all events in the coming weeks. So anyone that can't attend everything will be able to catch up at a later stage. So yeah, these are all being recorded and will be published on the Access VFX YouTube channel. All right, okay, I think we should start, guys.
Okay, let's go.
Good.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, welcome to my talk on Access VFX, meeting the industry. I'm going to talk about building the world you know and love, how we do this in CG. So my name is Rob Hopper. I'm head of CG at Union VFX. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the different teams and disciplines make up a CG department. So my background, I'm currently working at Union VFX, which we work on films, streaming and TV projects. I think relatively speaking, we have a small mid-sized CG team, but we're hoping to grow in future, and we're noticing that the amount of CG and the complexity of the CG in these projects are constantly increasing. Previously to Union, I worked at MPC, which is a slightly larger company. They also worked on films, and I also had good fortune to work on a couple of full CG projects, such as The Lion King and The Jungle Book. At MPC, I was the head of the effects department there, so my background is effects mainly, where I worked as a TD for a while, and then a lead, before becoming the HOD at MPC in London. Later on, you're going to be hearing from Dom as well, who's a generalist TD at Union. He's going to talk a bit about his journey into the world of VFX. But first, I'm going to give like a really brief history of visual effects to give you an idea, kind of where we came from. So the world of cinema has, always been home to kind of incredible parallel worlds. And these days, most films will have some digital component to how those visions are realized. But visual effects themselves have been around pretty much since the dawn of cinema. And a lot of those techniques and the terminology is actually surprisingly similar today. So starting with Georges Méliès. He was a very early pioneer of cinema and special effects, working on films like this one you see in the background, A Trip to the Moon, which is actually from 1902, so over 100 years ago. And he helped develop some of the techniques such as time-lapse photography, multiple exposure, substitution splices and dissolves. You can see an example here in the film called The Four Troublesome Heads, which is from 1998, where he's using two different exposures combined together to create the illusion there. Not long after that, matte painting was introduced in different forms, either a painted backdrop behind the characters, I guess not dissimilar to stages from theatre, but also, as you can see in this example from Charlie Chaplin, they could also paint on glass in between, see on a glass painting between the camera and the actors to create the illusion of the background behind. There's also techniques like forced perspective. Here's the Buster Keaton, an example here where they're shooting it away to make the drop appear a lot more dangerous. I think this is interesting because similar techniques like this are still used, and they're used in things like Lord of the Rings. I guess it's a reminder that CG, as powerful as it is, sometimes if you can get physical, real life photography doing things, it's actually a lot more. It can be a smarter way of doing things. Other technological developments include blue screens, where you'd film your actor in front of a blue background, and then you're able to replace everything that's blue with another bit of film that you've shot. And this is still very commonplace in visual effects, although it's more often a green screen these days. And stop motion animation has also been around pretty much since they've had cameras. But you saw in the 60s here, people like Ray Harryhausen, who's probably the most famous animator of that time, mixing stop motion animation with live footage. This is Jason and the Argonauts, but several other films around that time as well, Clash of the Titans. So at around about the same time, you have computer science technology developing at a very fast pace, computer graphics being developed, and a really important person in this field was someone called James Blinn. He worked for NASA and was working on new ways of displaying objects using computers and kind of modeling the way they react to light. And also he kind of writing scientific papers on things like environment mapping, bump mapping, these kind of techniques that are still in use today in a lot of computer graphics. So from there, you start seeing in the 80s, the first kind of instances of computer generated imagery in films themselves. I think the first one was ILM doing some work on The Wrath of Khan in 1982, and that was closely followed by Tron, which is probably the first example of using a lot of 3D graphics to generate the backgrounds here for a whole motion picture. Then later on in the 80s, you see there's lots of development in between these steps, but in The Abyss, you get this kind of CG character with ray tracing, to create a character made out of water, again by ILM, using again very cutting edge technology. I think this was using Photoshop and early predecessors to Maya. And then in the 90s, we start seeing a lot of groundbreaking films like Terminator 2, and Jurassic Park. And these were big inspiration for people like me who realized you could use now computers to make imagery that blends seamlessly with the live footage, and opens up a whole range of new possibilities in filmmaking. And then kind of take us to the modern day CGI imagery. You have films like Titanic, Star Wars prequels, Gladiator, Matrix, Lord of the Rings. All these films, pushing the boundaries of what's possible using computers and computer graphics in films, and winning many awards for technical achievements along the way. In 2009, you get Avatar, which was again a pioneering piece of work, showing photorealistic, completely CG worlds rendered in 3D stereo, where most of the story takes place, and setting the standards for people to follow. Beyond that, I'm a bit biased, but you also have very important works like the Jungle Book and Lion King, where you introduce furry characters and very, very detailed, completely computer-generated backdrops. Basically, by Lion King having a completely computer-generated film, which is actually was referred to as live action. Not quite sure what that means, but the level of detail and the realism at that stage has become to the level where it's seen as live action rather than an animated feature. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go through the different departments that make up our CG department. You find the kind of terminology and the exact roles would change at different companies, but the steps that you go through to output your final rendered images is largely the same. Each one of these you could talk about for a long time, so I'll cover them quite quickly. Essentially, typically you have an assets team who build the kind of objects that are to be used in the shots. And that's roughly composed of modeling, texture, rigging, look dev, and fur for creatures and environments that have maybe grass. They create assets that go into shots, which is made of departments such as match move, layout, rotation, animation, effects, also character effects and crowd, DMP environments, and lighting or rendering team. So starting with the modeling team, I kind of think about these as being similar to the model making departments on set. Similarly, they start with, you have to build the objects like model makers would, and that'll either be, you get people that would specialize either in hard surface modeling, here we have a simple model of a plane, or organic modeling for creatures, or more organic type objects. Then again, like a live prop would need painting. We have a texture team, and they will either paint in Photoshop or procedurally create textures to add that extra level of detail and color to the assets. And once that's done, assets will typically go through a stage of look dev to ensure that the materials that the objects are made of react to light in the correct way. So if something has a metal, something's made of metal, it will be shiny. Skin on creatures will have like a subsurface component. They'll be setting things up to work in a certain renderer. And although there are lots of different renderers, again, the underlying principles between them are largely the same. I did have a quick question about if it's from Seb on, whether it's difficult, if it's better to have a general understanding of a lot of different areas or better to specialize in one workflow. I do mention that a bit later, but you'll find it's kind of dependent on, can be dependent on the size of the company. At a smaller company, you might be more like a generalist, and that will mean you get the chance to work in lots of different areas. Whereas at a large company, you'd find yourself working in a much kind of smaller area. You might just like specialize, say within effects, specialize within one area of that. But if you have a big enough, big enough team around you, each person is good at their individual things and it all comes together. Whereas at smaller companies, you might find you need to do more. And for some people, they prefer that because they like doing a range of things, whereas other people prefer specializing. So I think it depends a bit on your own preferences, really. Cool. I have got a question about organic modeling. Maybe I'll
Rob,
leave that to
Rob,
ask.
we'll save the questions to the end, I think, because you might cover a lot of this in your talk.
Yes, I'll move on from there and I'll come back to those at the end. I'll say John, being the generalist, might be better placed to answer some of those as well. Cool. And then fur, again, this is only for characters that have either furry characters or environments with grass. It's usually represented, fur in CG is represented by millions or thousands of millions of curves. And the process of matching these curves to real world reference is quite an intricate process and requires very kind of sophisticated, like custom software, so that you can kind of groom and comb the fur in the right way to match the reference that you're trying to recreate in CG. Similar to the models, these are created in a static pose and can then be animated later on by the character effects department. And as well as fur, similar techniques are used for longer hair or manes, also feathers, and grass, leaves of vegetation or environments as well. Then you have the rigging department. Once you have your asset modeled and textured, you kind of have a static version, like a virtual statue, and the rigging department add controls and enable you to move creatures, characters, or props in certain ways if you want to animate them later on. Rigging is quite a technical discipline, lots of scripting involved. It kind of provides the mechanics of how a character or prop will move based on simple control points, which you can see are the kind of colorful boxes here. So for example, if I want to move a hand, the rig will calculate how I need to move my elbow and shoulder to result in the hand being in a certain position. That's called inverse kinematics. And advanced rigging also can calculate things like muscle tension, jiggle of like soft materials or fat on a character, skin sliding, wrinkling, all that kind of thing. And that's done in a way so that the animator can work with a simplified version, like you see here. And then all these kind of secondary details are added, cached after the animation is finalized and passed on to the rendering team. Then we get into shots. The first step in shots generally is to recreate the camera move from the footage that was shot on set. So we create a digital version of the camera, and that's then passed on to the other 3D software, Nuke, that's used later on in the pipeline process. You might also gather here, you can see geometry of the house itself. So often you'll have LiDAR data, which is scanned geometry from the set where you are, and also reference for photography to get information about the lighting conditions. Match Move artists will use software that can track these points. We use 3D Equalizer and generate the camera data from that. They will also track in any objects that might need some kind of CG interaction. Or rotomation is when you animate a character to match an actor in the footage as well. If you might want to replace part of that character or add something to the surface of their skin. I say it's really important to get this right because it's the foundation of what the rest of the CG is built on. So if things aren't sitting nicely or it's sliding, you're never gonna, the rest of the process isn't gonna feel real. Next, we have the animation department. These use the rig and the models from the assets department earlier on. As you know, it's not purely like in the Lion King where you have characters, the animals themselves being animated to kind of bring personality and emotion and stuff. Animations will also deal with things like moving vehicles, missiles, or potentially even just like a door that has to open and shut in the CG. So sometimes it can be a very creative process where you have to use your imagination or explore different types of performance, or you could be really closely matching some reference footage, either from set or from stock footage, or even it's quite common to act something out yourself, film it, and then try to match that in CG. effects. Okay, so this is my background. I've done a lot of effects. Again, the exact definition of what the effects department does could vary, but I always think of it as the kind of simulation of natural phenomena such as fire, water, dust, as well as more abstract or subjective visual effects. Yeah, like magic effects or potentially a transformation. I guess it's kind of similar to the old special effects departments on set where they're kind of blowing stuff up, setting bullet hits, or working with water tanks on set. These days, effects is mostly done in Houdini, so it's a good software to learn if you're interested in effects. It has different simulation models for the different types of effect that you would do. Most common are particles, which can be used for things like rain, snow, that kind of thing. It's basically just literal points in space that have extra attributes for their size, their color, their velocity. And then you have volume simulations, which are three-dimensional grids of voxels. It's a bit like an image, but in three-dimensional space. And instead of having color, it has attributes like density and heat. And the way that those move is simulated using complex like fluid dynamic algorithms, and is used for things like explosions. You see here, steam and dust and that kind of thing. You also have flip simulations for water, which is a combination of both. And kind of one of the more complex areas of CG is getting realistic water simulations. Simulations in effects can get very big pretty quickly, and effects departments are quite famous for using up all the storage and all the CPU power at a facility. For large effects, you could be talking about billions of points, billions of voxels, and some simulations that could run overnight. They could take like 20 hours, 40 hours, something like that. So yeah, it's a good discipline for patient people, I guess. You also have, next in the departments, we have character effects. It's similarities to effects in that it's mostly simulated kind of work. It can be used for fur, cloth, muscles. Similar to effects, it's solved using points-based dynamics. And in this case, they're normally constrained, so you have a lot of points representing each individual hair, and it's constrained, attached to a model here, say the horse. And then you have physical attributes on each of those curves, representing things like stiffness or elasticity to try to recreate the way that material would behave in real life. And cloth works in the same way, lots of points all connected together. And again, you can define like stiffness and different properties to make it behave like denim or rubber or whatever that material needs to be made of. And in some, depending on the different studios, you might also have character finishing department as part of the character effects, where they make sure that characters aren't intersecting with the ground, or you don't get any strange shapes or deformations. And they kind of provide that final shape for the model. Crowds is a CG department which is likely to get busier in future due to some of the new restrictions on how you're able to shoot these days. So you have a limited number of people on set at any one time. The crowd department use a selection of animated clips and variation of characters, or agents as they're called in crowd. And then they combine these with some AI logic to simulate the movement of large amounts of people. Or it could also be flocks of birds or schools of fish, or even like a battalion of spaceships. And they use, again, logic, simulation to calculate the behavior of each of those agents. This can be quite sophisticated interaction, or even physical simulation of ragdolls where characters just turn into, they kind of go limp and physics take over the animation from that point. The next part we have is DMP, or digital map painting in environments. Again, there are lots of similarities with traditional map painting. It could be as simple as painting a 2D image, which is then composited behind the actors and the stuff that's been shot live on set. It could also be a painted image that's then projected onto some geometry with some three-dimensional properties, some rough approximation of how it would appear on set, so that then you get some kind of parallax for a moving camera. That's kind of referred to as a 2.5D approach often. And then you have like full 3D environments, which will be modeled similarly to, other assets are modeled, textured, and then additionally scattered with detailed geometry like debris, could be small rocks and pebbles, adding leaves to trees, that kind of thing, to create like a fully 3D environment. And then the last department I'm covering here is the lighting and rendering. So again, there are similarities to lighting on set. A lot of the terminology in your lighting packages could be similar. They talk about gobos and gaffers and these kind of things that are on set as well. And these days, the lighting models that are used by the renderers they do try to be as physically accurate as possible. So it's becoming much more, like a scientific kind of process. Traditionally, you'll try to match the lighting conditions in the plate and bring all your CG assets together, and everything will be rendered in that environment and handed off to comp, with the exception of things like matte paintings, which have the lighting in them already. Commonly the lighting team would kind of managing a lot of data, and they'll split renders into layers. So you'll have maybe a foreground layer. You might have your plants as rendered as one layer, and your background as a different layer. All of which kind of enables there's more flexibility in comp then to change things, because it's always going to be quicker to change things in comp than it is to re-render stuff. And to that end as well, they'll provide a lot of different AOVs, they're called, which is kind of secondary images, where you can divide the lighting into the different components, like the specular or the contribution from different lights into its own image. And then that kind of gives the comp team the ability to dial in different properties without having to send everything back to rendering. Like I say, where might you fit in this kind of department, amongst these different departments? I think CG in general requires a kind of a mix of creative and technical ability. And it is quite rare to find people that excel at both the very creative and the very technical. And you'll probably find you're somewhere in between on that kind of spectrum. So you might be, if you're more artistic, you might be better suited to some of the more creative, purely creative disciplines like matte painting or texturing. And then people that are quite technical might end up working more in effects or crowd, or be programming, working as a TD or as part of the pipeline. So I think depending on what your interests are, that might kind of guide a bit where you naturally fit in. And like I say, at smaller companies, you will have generalists as well, and they will be able to do multiple parts of this overall workflow. And for people that like doing lots of different things, that can be a really rewarding way of working. Whereas at large companies, you might be really, really good at one specific thing, and you can concentrate on that and let other people do the stuff they're not so good at. Okay, at that point, I'm going to hand over to Dom, who's been with us at Union for a number of years, and he's going to talk a little bit about how he got there. Over to you, Dom.
Cool. Thanks, Rob. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Yes, I'm Dom. I'm a CG generalist at Union, and I've been there for about 2.5 years now. I didn't start out as a CG generalist, so I'm just going to give you a brief history of my experience in the industry and how I got from school all the way to where I am now. I hope you like it. So when I was at school, I was really interested in games and films, and I really liked games like Halo Reach and films like Lord of the Rings, because I really enjoyed the fantasy element of it, how I would just be in this like imaginary world that someone's come up with, and I could really get on board with all the ideas and like these fantastic landscapes that they create. And I was also really into directors Tim Burton, Peter Jackson for that exact reason. They would have their amazing ideas and just manage to put them into film, especially Tim Burton, how he would create these fantastic like scenes and then make them out of models. And like I couldn't even imagine like making all the sorts of models and scenes that he used to make, and I really look up to them when I was younger. So school was fun for me. I was really into my photography. I was really into woodwork and making things with my hands, and I was very creative and into art. And my main focus was always to follow my dream of getting into films. And I didn't want to be in front of the camera. I always wanted to be doing something to do with films and just see my name in the credits. That was it. That's what I wanted to do. So when I was in my A levels, as someone in the upper years when I joined left to go to university to study films and animation, and I really liked the idea of that, but I didn't know, because there were so many different courses which kind of threw me into that. And I originally decided to follow 2D animation because I really like the idea of going and following like Tim Burton and then doing a lot of set design and all that sort of stuff. So I chose 2D animation course at University of Portsmouth. I've always been a huge fan of stop motion, and especially Nightmare Before Christmas. I love the idea of merging art and photography skills together from my A levels to try and follow that into Portsmouth University. The course was very diverse. I mean, we literally started with doing old cell animation, which for like the youngsters here, that is literally a light box. So it's a light up against just a bit of plastic, and then you draw 25 drawings over and over again per second. And then eventually, after hours and hours and hours and hours of drawing, you get like a second of what of something going across the screen. And I mean, that is literally the basis of light film, is that kind of concept. But I liked it. I liked the journey of making something rather than the actual final product. And that got me really interested in like the different types of animation, from stop motion to 3D animation and live action. During my time on the course, I was able to do set design, and we did a bit of study on Fantastic Mr. Fox, which is the Fox image you can see in front of you. And they would make, a bit like Nightmare Before Christmas, they'd make an entire like set, and they'd make tiny little saucepans, they'd make like little ties, they'd do everything. And I really got into that. And in one of my projects, I did I think I carved it out of foam board and just went to one of those train store shops and just got everything and just made this like little set, and I really enjoyed it. And that was the end of my first year. And then during my second year, whilst at the end of my second year, where I started to really get into 3D animation. And the first thing we kind of came up with was to come up with some sort of bug or creature. And I came up with this tiny little bug which took me weeks to make. And I'm talking like I put hours and hours into this little bug you can see on your screen at the top there. And I mean, that would take like seconds now. But I learned how to like rig it. I learned how to do all these things. We had to make it jump from. We had to figure out how to make it walk and then jump. Because it was such a diverse animation course, we basically touched on something and just hoped you go away and practice it yourself. And we did. We didn't really have many of these like YouTube videos of all these people watching it. And yeah, I really enjoyed the 3D aspect of it, because it was, again, like it was almost like I was back at school, like in my woodwork, like forming stuff with my hands. But instead it's on the computer. So that was my first project. It was really fun. And then straight after that, I got into another 3D project with some friends of mine. We did a Lego Lord of the Rings short film, and it was like 10 seconds long, and it took us weeks again of late nights with like relentless energy and all that sort of stuff, but keeping us motivated. It was so fun. But I was really into like making stuff and trying to make little films. So and after that, I got really interested in modeling and 3D animation. After this, I got into the university motion capture club, where I would act for master students and games courses. That was a lot of fun. I mean, I loved it because it reminds me of, like I was talking earlier about Peter Jackson and Lord of the Rings, how he did so much. I was almost like imitating all those characters I've seen on film and acting them. And what you see in that image is me on the right hand side, acting with a lady, and then from that, all those red cameras around the outside, they would pick up all the little balls that were on the suits, and then they would create basically a 3D representation of that, which you could put a model on it. And then I did that for many games courses, doing funny like Monty Python walks and fight scenes and like wrestling moves where I got choke slammed. It was super fun. And then yeah, it was a lot of fun. And well, that basically came to the end of the year, and I finished all my projects, and I went, what's the next step? So after my degree, I really wanted to further my study, but I just didn't know what else to do. Do I want to do another course? Do I want to do a master's in this? Do I want to do this? And then one of our family friends was in the industry already, and at the time he was working on Lego, the first Lego movie. And I sat with him, had a chat, and he was like, look, if you want to further, why don't you try this? And he'd heard about the Escape Studios course in 3D, and he recommended it. He said it was really good for people who wanted to get into the industry and just further their studies. So I decided to start the course, and it was Advanced 3D Visual Effects at Escape Studios. And I was really keen for it because Escape Studios has a good reputation of high quality teaching from industry professionals and keeping their courses relevant and changing with times with the software. At the time, Maya was basically buying all the softwares and making some of them redundant. We used Maya now, but before, when I was at uni, we did a bit of soft image, which isn't really a thing anymore, or soft image, however you say it. So I started the course, and this was really where I started to focus, and because there was in-depth software classes, industry artists would come in and do lectures for us. It was just when one of the Guardians of the Galaxy films came out, and we had one of the people come in and do the swarm effects for all the ships when they were swarming down to the Earth and blowing up, and that to create this amazing new thing that hadn't been done before. And we were all like in awe and got to talk to them and ask advice about our projects and stuff like that. So it's really good, fun team building projects, getting ready for industry, kind of, because it's still school, but it gets you kind of close to what industry is like. But they taught us tracking, 3D modeling, 3D texturing, like lighting models, effects for dust, explosions in the industry softwares that I use now. After finishing Escape Studios, I took some freelance opportunities to work on. I did some work on housing association plans whilst I was working on my showreel and applying for jobs, just to keep me busy and keep me relevant. And after a couple of months, I got a job running at an editing firm called Nomad VFX, so Nomad Editing, and they're looking for an effects runner for to basically come in and just help out. And I know a lot of people straight out of study, they want to go straight in at the job that they want, but and running doesn't seem that glamorous. It's not the most glamorous job, and I did it. And I don't think if I redid my time, I would not do it. I'd still would do it because it was very humbling for me. I got to learn on the job. I got taught. Got to speak and see the pipeline and talk to everyone. Just like our runners at Union, they'll come over and be like, "Oh, that's cool. Can you tell me how you did that?" All the sort of stuff, and we help out. It's a great place to learn, being a runner. Yeah, you get to run drives to places and everything like that. But the main thing is that if you do well, you get to study, and all the software's there to like further yourself. And for me, I managed to do my show reel at night and use all the software. So when I finished my show reel, after a while, I left and joined Cinesite. And this is where I finally got my first credit, and I was so excited. My first job in the industry was a junior match move artist, where I worked on cameras and laying out 3D scenes for the rest of VFX teams, and working on the shots. I was so pleased that I got to work on films with actors I loved, and like Liam Neeson, Robert Downey Jr., Chris Pratt. I mean, I've done a couple of Liam Neeson films now, but yeah, during my time, I honed in my skills even more, and as a match move artist, which I learned to escape, and it really helped me. It really helped me quickly take everything on board and get up to industry speed, and everything was needed of me, and I just took it on. And my animation background and Escape Studios help made when we're on Avengers to do a lot of the rotomation, which is where you copy the body shape of someone. So if there was a Superman suit and he was doing that, you'd put a 3D model over the top of his hand, and it would look like an Iron Man suit. And that we had to do a lot of that. And with my animation background, it kind of like helped me a lot. So I'm very thankful I did that the animation course, because it really did help. Moving on, when my contract was up, I had the opportunity of joining Union VFX. This was such a great move for me, because it gave me the opportunity to work on a wider range of television and films. And the rapid turnarounds of these films, I tell you. When I was at Cinesite, I did 3 films within a year, and then in my first 3 months, I did like five films and 2 TV shows. It was crazy, but I got to work on a crazy amount of different things. The first thing we worked on was Mamma Mia, and then we jumped onto a couple of other television shows, and then it really made me. The interest in all these different types of films really made me passionate about just trying to impress and really just getting my head down and just being a yes man and just be a team player. And after 3 months, I was made permanent staff at Union, which was I was absolutely over the moon about. And not long after that, I was given opportunities to do more than match move. I got to do layout. I got to do a bit of 3D modeling on television shows, and after a while, I just picked up project after project after project, and yeah, I've always been a team player, and I've got to work on some absolutely crazy things, like on Happy. I got given the opportunity to do some modeling of the inside of a human arm, and it was pretty gory. So my search history for that week was mental. People were coming over just like, "Oh, what are you looking at? What are you looking at?" And I had to do the inside of someone's arm, and it was flapping about like this. And I had to do the bone, and I had to find out the perfect colors for the bone when I was texturing it. And I'd never used one of the texturing softwares we do, and I got because I've had some background in it before. I got to use it, so then I had to find out the jelly sort of like fat that's around your wrist and all the different layers. It was great. I loved it. Yeah, from that I've done bullet wounds in shows, and I've just been able to do like a wide range of things because of I just like to do things, and I always just pick up new shots and everything like that. So then that kind of brings me to where I am now. I've been a generalist on these shows for a little bit now, and I really enjoy it. I still do from the start of Matchroot all the way through to all the other jobs where I've just done effects on some of the shows that we've just done. So I do a bit of everything really. It's yeah, I really enjoy my job, and it's such an interesting, creative and creatively stimulating job working in films, and I've always wanted to do it, and I'm so glad that I'm finally where I am, and I get to work on a range of stuff like The Gentleman this year that's just come out. If you haven't seen it, it's a great film, but that was a really fun film to work on. Same as Yesterday, that was great because we had to learn a bit the crowd pipeline because we did so much crowd, I tell you. Yeah, it's been great, and the journey's been worth it, and I loved every minute of it, and yeah, I wouldn't do any other job, if I'm honest. I wouldn't do anything else. And a place like Union, they really make you feel like home, especially when they give you opportunity to work on like all the stuff that we do. Yeah, so that's kind of my little journey, and shout out to Daniel who's watching, and Carol. Yeah, that's me.
Cool, thanks, Dom. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's coming up next, and then hopefully we'll get to some questions. I did see someone was asking about video games, so I'll cover a little bit of that here. So as you can see, visual effects has come a long way in a relatively short time. You know, from nothing essentially in the 70s to now being able to do fully CG features, and the pace of that progress shows no sign of slowing down. And two areas I think we're going to see a lot of development in the coming years is game engines and machine learning. So when I say game engines, it's likely to be either Unreal or Unity, and these are both, we've seen those starting to be used for virtual production of films. In some cases, that's either replacing previs, or in the case of Lion King, it was instead of filming anything for real, they used the game engine to block out all the shots and the sequences. We've also seen on recent TV series, The Mandalorian, that they were able to use Unreal to create these CG environments and then project them onto giant LED screens that they then would film the actors in front of, so that you get in theory, you get the final image on your camera. So you can film the characters in front of this CG background, and you get all the lighting from the LED screens, and there's no need for a green screen or, you know, in theory, any compositing after the fact. And there's a lot of interest in that area, and a lot of work being done to kind of progress that field. So I can see that being, yeah, like I say, a big area for development in the future. I think another area is machine learning. I'm not going to pretend that I fully understand how machine learning works, but at the moment it's a very popular field in computer science in general, and it has like quite specific applications that can be used for visual effects. You've probably seen examples of kind of deep fakes where you can replace a face. Like in this example, you can use a source video and replace the face from a library of other faces, famous faces. So you can already entirely replace an actor in a film. You can put Nicolas Cage in your film, which seems quite popular to do, or you can de-age them so they're 20 years younger. But there's also kind of more technical applications as well, where you can use it to literally up-res images, so you render a lot smaller and use AI to up-res it. It's also being tested for things like fluid simulation, advanced crowd logic, or even just rendering, making all that faster. This technology is starting to make its way into the VFX software itself, and I think it's going to have a huge impact on our workflows in the future, and in other domains as well, I'm sure. So now I guess we're going to go to questions.
Thanks, guys.
It gives me a red.
Shall I? Yeah, that's weird. I can see your red face. Shall I
Red.
Shall I just pick some questions out for you guys to answer?
Sure.
So let's start with, this is an anonymous attendee, but they've asked, will photogrammetry replace procedural texturing methods?
I don't know. I don't personally. I don't think so. Photogrammetry is really good at recreating, I guess, stuff that you can actually go and shoot. I guess a lot of the times we're recreating stuff that doesn't exist or creating something from scratch, and I think it has a slightly different kind of application. And I know things like Substance are very powerful ways of generating like these procedural textures. I don't know, Dom, you've probably more experience of actually doing texturing than me.
Well, I don't think it will replace it, because still people want like a hands-on approach when it comes to texturing.
Yeah, there'll always be a need.
Yeah, because when you're in your reviews, you'll have someone go, actually, I don't like that. Can you just add this on top, like a scratch here or a scratch there? So having like Substance Painter, which is one of the main ones we use, you can just quickly jump on, put the scratch on, and then render it out, and then the like Rob will be like, it's great. And, then you can carry on.
Okay, cool. And then Seb has asked, do the character effects and rigging teams work closely? And I suppose this depends on where you're working. But Rob, I guess from your experience in some of the larger studios, and then coming to a smaller one, how has that been?
Yeah, I would say they're definitely closely related. I think somewhere like Union, you might find it could be the same person, doing both those things. Somewhere like MPC, we would have riggers working at, they'd work up some clever logic and stuff to calculate things like muscle tension. So different muscles fire as characters move around, but that would then get picked up by the character effects artist. And again, like Dom says, you might get something really good procedurally, but then you'll probably find someone, you get specific feedback, and then there is control in character effects to shape things. So they probably work pretty closely together. And I think even at NBC, people would swap between those disciplines. So you might start the show rigging, and then when it comes to the stage where you're only working on shots and the rigs are finished, you might go and work in character effects to kind of finish up the shots.
Cool. And then we've had a couple of questions that are based around running. So one being, is it best to start off as a runner? Which, Dom, that was obviously your route in. And a second one being, do positions for running require much experience? And would someone who's interested in getting experience need to build up an extensive portfolio before applying? I mean, from my point of view, I suppose as a recruiter, a runner, we aren't expecting a huge amount of experience from those, people coming in via that route. What we'd be looking for is a good show reel. Maybe you're a recent graduate or self-taught, but to a certain level. So I think you just have to make sure that what you're demonstrating is good enough to get you that I hate this phrase, but the foot in the door. And then in terms of, is it best to start as a runner? I think this depends on each individual. I have seen people that, yes, running has definitely benefited them. And then I have seen, junior artists that have been that good that they can go straight into entry-level positions. So I think what you need to do is just be realistic with your skills as an artist. Don't oversell yourself. Get feedback from friends, contacts in the industry on your work, and kind of see what they would suggest. So yeah, I hope that answers those two questions. Let's pick another one. This is anonymous, would you consider Blender to be a suitable piece of software when it comes to modeling assets for games? Blender's one of the only free ones, isn't it, that you can kind of pootle about at as like entry level?
I don't have a huge amount of experience in it, but I've heard lots of good things. I mean, I think if that's what you have access to, it's a great way to build your skills. I don't see why it wouldn't be.
Yeah.
It may not be quite as, it might not have the same usability like that Maya has.
No, but as a software that's free, it's probably a really good place to start, isn't it? To at least build those skills, and then you'd learn Maya in university or in a professional environment.
Yeah. Well, Maya has also, if you're a student as well, there are free licenses for students for all of their software. That's Autodesk, so they're pretty good with that. But if you're not in university or anything like that, or a student, yeah, Blender's a good way to start.
I think whatever you're comfortable with. Personally, if I see that someone's got a good eye and they're able to create models that look great, I think where it comes from is probably secondary. And if you've got a good eye, you could probably learn Maya or ZBrush or whatever it is, technically when you need to. So yeah, I think if you've got access to it, it's a good way to get
worth doing.
involved. Yeah. I
don't know if you'll be able to answer this one because it's kind of comp focused, but again, another anonymous attendee. I've heard a lot about subtractive compositing and multi-layer compositing. In your experience, what is used more often?
Interesting.
I mean, given that we're a 3D talk, it might be a bit of a tough one for us to answer, but I
believe the way we work is the multi-layering stuff.
Yeah.
So that's my experience of it. But yeah, to be honest, I wouldn't really be able to tell you what the difference is, why you might want to use subtractive.
Sorry about that, anonymous attendee. We weren't able to help you there. Right, what time are we on? Okay, I reckon we've got a couple more that we could do. So this is from Barath. Do studios use Megascan assets in the industry pipeline?
I can say that yes.
Dom's face.
Yes. I'd like to say yes, because we've recently just done a few tests with this. I
think it was in the presentation, wasn't it? Rob used it as the building with the reds and that was one of our mega scans.
Scanning buildings and objects and actually bring in. And one of our artists has got a drone which he's using at the moment to testing, but basically taking photos of a building, like all the way around and up and down every angle you can, like hundreds and hundreds of photos. Then have a drone scan it as well, put into a software. And then it creates up a 3D model of it, including textures. We looked into that briefly. I think it was like a couple of weeks ago.
I was thinking maybe talking about Megascan. So is that not the Epic tool for generating textures and stuff?
Oh, I just saw
kind of. I think NBC they were using Megascans, but there was a kind of a licensing program for that. I think it works better for really big studios. And if you're working in games, I think it's free, and it is really good, really powerful. But I don't know if it's not always a great fit for smaller companies. If I've understood the question right.
Yeah, we're not sure what the question actually was, so hopefully one of those answers was right. Okay, and then maybe one or two more. So another anonymous, is it possible to work in 2D and 3D areas simultaneously? I think I know the answer to this one. I would say that early on, give everything a go, at university, try everything, but 2D and 3D are particularly different. I think the only areas that you would ever get crossover in is working in full CG feature animation projects where lighting and compositing go together. So that's really, from my experience, the only time 3D and 2D might be done by the same person. 2D is obviously quite a straightforward route. You literally have roto prep and compositing. That's how it goes. But 3D is so vast that you'd probably be overshooting a little bit with trying to do both 2D and 3D. I think that would be a little bit overwhelming for someone to do. Don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of many people that have done a lot of switching between two. They might have skills in both areas, but generally you have to concentrate on one, I think, once you're working on like industry projects.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, well, I'm sorry we haven't been able to answer all the questions. I know that Escape are kindly going to be collating anything that we didn't answer, and we will hopefully be doing something on the website in the future, as well as posting all talks that have been recorded. So if you weren't able to attend every talk, you'll be able to watch them back and also have some of your questions answered again at another time. So thanks Rob and Dom for talking us through CG, and thanks everyone for joining, and thanks Escape for hosting.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Cool. Oh, we're getting lots of thank yous.